The day they asked me to leave, they didn't raise their voices. They didn't need to. Everything about that moment was calm, controlled, and deliberate, like a decision that had already been made long before I walked into that room. My ex-mother-in-law sat across from me at the long dining table, fingers folded neatly, posture perfect, expression carefully neutral. My ex-husband stood by the window, not looking at me, not saying anything, just present enough to make it official. "It's better this way," she said, her tone soft but firm, like she was offering me something instead of taking everything. I didn't respond immediately. I had learned that reacting too quickly in that house only made things easier for them. They didn't want emotion. They wanted compliance. Better for who? I asked calmly. She didn't hesitate. For the family. Of course. It was always for the family. Not for me. Not for the truth. Just for the version of things they wanted people to believe. "You've already made your decision," I said, more as a statement than a question. "Yes," she replied, and there was no discomfort in it. No hesitation. Just certainty. That was the part that always stood out. Not what they did, but how easily they did it. My ex-husband finally spoke, his voice quieter, less controlled, but still aligned with everything she had already said. "It's complicated right now," he added. "There's a lot of attention. People are asking questions." "About what?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "About you," he said. I almost smiled at that, because the problem was never what I had done. The problem was what I represented. Unpredictable. Independent. Not easily explained. In a family built on reputation, that was enough. "You're saying I don't fit the image," I said. Neither of them corrected me. That told me everything. The house around us was silent, but it carried weight. High ceilings, polished floors, artwork placed with intention, every detail designed to reflect a certain kind of life. To them, it wasn't just a home. It was a statement, a symbol. Something that needed to remain flawless, untouched by anything that didn't align with the story they told the world. And apparently, I didn't. "We'll make sure you're taken care of," my ex-mother-in-law added, like that was supposed to soften the moment. "You won't leave with nothing." Nothing. The word lingered for a second. Not because of what it meant, but because of how little they understood. "I'm not asking for anything," I said. That caught her off guard. Not visibly, not in a way anyone else would notice, but enough for me to see it. Because in her mind, everything had a transaction attached to it. Everything could be balanced, negotiated, controlled. Except this. "Then it's settled," she said, regaining control of the moment quickly. Of course it was. It had always been settled. I stood up slowly, not rushing, not making it dramatic, just changing the position of the moment. Because staying seated would have meant I was still part of their version of it. "I'll leave tonight," I said. My ex-husband finally looked at me then, just for a second, like he wanted to say something else, something real, something not filtered through everything around him. But he didn't. And that was enough. I walked through the house one last time before I packed anything, not to say goodbye, but to observe. To take in the details the same way I always had, not as someone who belonged there, but as someone who understood it. The structure, the design, the value. Because while they saw a home, I saw something else entirely. Something they never bothered to question. My room was exactly as I left it, nothing disturbed, nothing out of place, like I had already been erased before I even started packing. I moved through it quietly, placing things into a single bag, not taking more than I needed, not leaving anything important behind. Because the truth was, nothing important was in that room. By the time I reached the front door, everything was done. No dramatic exit, no final words, no attempt to hold on to something that had already been taken away in every way that mattered. "You understand why this had to happen," my ex-mother-in-law said as I stepped toward the door. I paused for a moment, then turned slightly. Yes, I said. And I did. Better than they thought. Because they believed they were removing a problem, cleaning up a situation, protecting something valuable. What they didn't realize was that they were standing inside something they didn't own. I stepped outside without looking back, the door closing behind me with a quiet finality that felt exactly like what it was. An ending. At least, that's what they thought. I didn't go far that night. Not because I didn't have anywhere to go, but because I didn't need to rush. Urgency belongs to people who are losing something. I wasn't. Not really. I checked into a nearby hotel, something quiet, private, far enough from the estate to create distance, but close enough to keep perspective. From the window, I could still see the lights. The estate stood exactly the same as it always had, perfect, controlled, untouched. Staff moving in quiet patterns, security at the gates, everything functioning like nothing had changed. Because for them, nothing had. They had removed me. Problem solved. Image protected. Narrative intact. I set my bag down and sat in the chair near the window, not thinking about what I had left behind, but about what they had assumed. Because assumptions are where control begins to slip. And in that house, control was everything. They believed the estate belonged to them because they lived in it, because they maintained it, because their name was attached to it publicly, because that's how ownership looks from the outside. But ownership isn't about appearance. It's about structure. And structure was something I understood better than any of them. The estate hadn't been transferred the way they thought it had. It wasn't a simple inheritance, not a direct handover, not something tied to a single name in a way that could be easily explained over dinner conversations or public records. It was layered, strategic, protected. And years ago, quietly, without announcement, without recognition, it had been placed under my control. Not visibly, not obviously, but legally, completely. I didn't remind them of that when they asked me to leave. I didn't argue. I didn't correct them. Because moments like that aren't about speaking. They're about timing. The next morning, I didn't wake up early. I didn't rush to make calls or send messages. I let the day begin the same way theirs would, calm, controlled, unaware. Because nothing had changed yet. Not for them. But it was about to. I made one call. Not emotional. Not personal. Professional. Measured. The kind of call that doesn't need explanation. Proceed, I said. That was all. On the other side, they didn't ask questions. They didn't need to, because everything had already been prepared. The process wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It didn't involve confrontation or conflict. It was quiet, precise, final. By midday, the first signs appeared. A change in access. Subtle, but noticeable. Systems updated. Permissions adjusted. Staff notified. Not publicly, internally. The kind of shift that doesn't create chaos, but creates confusion. Because when control moves, it doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself. My phone rang just after that. His name. I let it ring once, then answered. What did you do? My ex-husband asked, his voice tight, controlled, but already carrying something underneath. I didn't do anything, I replied calmly. That's not true, he said. There are changes. Access, accounts, everything. People are asking questions. I leaned back slightly, looking out the window. Good, I said. A pause. What does that mean? He asked. It means they're noticing, I replied. Another pause. Longer. You need to fix this, he said. Whatever you did, reverse it. No, I said. The word landed exactly where it needed to. You can't just, he started, then stopped, catching himself, adjusting his tone. This is our home. I let that sit for a moment, then said, no, it's not. Silence. Heavy. Real. Because that was the moment everything shifted for him. What are you talking about? He asked, quieter now. I'm talking about ownership, I replied. Another pause. And this time, understanding started to form. That's not possible, he said. It is, I answered. How? He asked. I didn't explain everything. I didn't need to. You should have looked into it before asking me to leave, I said. The silence that followed wasn't confusion anymore. It was realization. Because now, the structure they never questioned was becoming visible. You're serious, he said. Yes. More silence. Because there was nothing left to argue. Nothing left to deny. They had made a decision based on what they believed was true. And now, they were facing what actually was. What happens now? He asked finally. I stood up, walking toward the window, looking out at the estate again. The same building, the same image, but a completely different reality. Now, I said calmly, we adjust. He didn't respond, because he didn't know what that meant yet. And that was the point. Because control doesn't just come from ownership. It comes from understanding. And for the first time, they didn't understand anything. I'll be there tomorrow, I added. Not as a request. Not as a question. As a statement. The line stayed quiet for a second longer, then ended. I set my phone down and looked out one last time. They had removed me to protect their reputation, to control the image, to keep everything exactly the way they wanted it. But they forgot something simple. You can't remove someone from something they own.